Introduction: the tuning fork of the universe. The modern world has forgotten the immense value of silence. We walk immersed in a deafening market, a public square where millions of voices compete to be right, drowning each other in a chaotic and perpetual murmur. Amidst this incessant din, the ordinary man loses his way. Character rusts, and life becomes a dissonant melody. Under the pressure of the crowd, he changes his convictions as easily as the wind changes direction. To avoid clashing, he imitates the noise of others. In doing so, his own voice is extinguished, and his entire life becomes full of friction, anguish, and exhaustion. But nature does not operate through the clamor of the masses. Nature operates through resonance and firmness. If you observe the behavior of metals and the laws of acoustics, you will discover a tool of absolute nobility, the tuning fork. Forged in pure steel, it was not designed to play complex melodies or seek applause. Its purpose is much deeper and more austere. It is a single note. When struck firmly, it emits a perfect, constant, and unalterable frequency. The tuning fork does not argue with the vulgar noises surrounding it. It does not try to shout them down. It simply vibrates with such purity and clarity that inevitably other instruments in the room are forced to adjust their strings to its truth. The frequency of truth is not a text on how to persuade others through tricks or win vain arguments. It is a return to the immutable principles of physics, weight, and spirit. It is an invitation to stop being the dry leaf trembling on the branch and become the robust trunk that holds the earth. It is a forge of character. Throughout these pages, we will move away from contemporary haste to enter the forge of character. We will explore how lying and complacency are nothing more than thermal wear, a useless friction that ages the soul prematurely. We will understand that true authority resembles gravity. It does not need to move desperately. You are about to undertake a journey toward the forge of your own mature identity. You will learn to use the vacuum of silence as an impenetrable shield, to give your word back the dense and unshakable weight of lead, and to anchor your center of mass so that emotional storms and tragedies crash against you without moving you. The time has come to leave the strident choir of the crowd. The hour has come to temper the spirit. Prepare to find that fundamental note lying dormant within you, strike the dry blow against the anvil of reality, and finally become the tuning fork that imposes calm in the room. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Consensus, the Static Wall. From the dawn of our existence, the human being is thrown into a world that demands, with subtle but implacable violence, that they renounce their own voice. In life's first measures, we are taught that safety and survival depend on our ability not to clash. We are instructed to seek the warm and deceptive refuge of the herd. We grow up under the unwritten dogma that truth is a matter of numbers. If an immense crowd sings the same song, we blindly assume that melody must be the correct one. To this optical and auditory illusion, this trap into which almost all mortals fall, we shall call the mirage of consensus. It is the first barrier to your sovereignty. If you stop for a moment in the stillness of your home and gaze at the long path of your lived years, you will notice how much of your precious vital energy has been poured onto the altar of others' approval. Remember the countless times you have nodded in empty conversations simply to avoid the friction of conflict. Recall those moments when your instinct, that ancient and perfect compass residing in your gut, screamed at you that a path was wrong, but you chose to remain silent because the rest of the room seemed to march cheerfully toward the abyss. Over decades, we have molded our opinions and hidden our true concerns to fit acceptable molds. In the eyes of this noisy world, this docile behavior is disguised with noble words. They call it diplomacy, kindness, or spirit of sacrifice. The world applauds us when we are light leaves carried meekly by the river's current. However, when maturity is reached, that stage where time becomes a countable treasure, fatigue sets in. An immense tiredness that does not come from the wear of bones, but from the friction of the spirit. That chronic exhaustion is the natural price of having spent 40, 50, or 70 years trying to tune your own instrument to sound like an orchestra that is in reality completely out of tune. You have been fighting your own nature. The great tragedy of consensus is that it demands you renounce your own gravity. It demands you become a porous, light material, floating at the mercy of others' changing opinions. But the public square is a chaotic market. Today the crowd applauds an idea, tomorrow they condemn it. The man who ties his peace to public opinion is lost. He is condemned to live eternally dizzy, shaken by a furious swell that lacks purpose or direction. The wall of static is that constant noise that surrounds and suffocates us, alarming news, hallway gossip, and inherited fears repeated like an empty echo. It is an acoustic wall raised to ensure you never hear the beat of your conscience. As long as you harbor the belief that you need the agreement of others to validate the richness of your experience, you will remain trapped behind that invisible stone wall. You will live exhausted, deciphering a collective murmur that means nothing. Maturity demands a quiet rebellion. Truth has never been a democratic matter. Truth is not put to a vote in assemblies. A million voices shouting a lie in unison do not make it a truth, just as a million raindrops hitting a mountainside do not move it a single centimeter from its place. Your character must become that mountain, immovable and silent against the storm of consensus. 2. The law of waves and the soul's static. To understand exactly why the urge to please everyone leaves us so empty and exhausted, we must fix our gaze on the incorruptible laws of nature. Specifically, we must observe the elementary physics of waves and sound, for the universe does not lie in its way of propagating energy. Nature is the ultimate engineering manual. Imagine a still pond in the heart of a silent forest, with a surface smooth like a silver mirror. If you take a heavy stone and drop it exactly in the center, the impact will generate perfect, concentric waves traveling with symmetry to the shores. That is the image of an individual acting from their own center of gravity. Now change the scene. Imagine 1,000 people stand around that pond and, in panic, throw thousands of stones of different sizes and forces. What happens to the surface? The waves collide violently. The crests of some waves crash into the valleys of others. In physics, this is known as destructive interference. When two waves of different frequencies collide, instead of adding up to create a larger wave, they cancel each other out. They shatter on impact. The result is not a majestic wave, but a turbulent, frothy surface lacking all harmony. It is an agitated disorder traveling nowhere, consuming energy in useless clashes. In the world of sound, when thousands of distinct frequencies sound at once and collide, the ear does not perceive a symphony. What it perceives is white noise or pure static. It is that harsh, constant hum that termina by numbing the senses until leaving us blind and deaf to real danger. Your life is subject to this law. When you allow the unsolicited opinions of relatives and the expectations of society to dictate how you must live, you are allowing 1,000 stones to fall into your pond. You are opening the doors to destructive interference. The result is internal chaos. You try to please everyone, and the energy of your soul is annulled. The fundamental error of human goodwill is believing that by adding all opinions and yielding a little to each, a peaceful agreement will be reached. Nature proves the opposite with beautiful cruelty. Adding too many different frequencies never creates a symphony. It creates an unbearable din. Silence must be enforced. Truth does not need a choir. Truth is a granite column that stands by its own weight. If you wish to recover the crystalline clarity of your days, you must stop trying to harmonize with the world's noise. You must raise a stone wall between your sanctuary and the market, accepting that many will be deeply offended. 3. The nobility of immobility, the lesson of lead. Dismantling the mirage of consensus does not require a war of words. It requires a radical transformation in the matter of your character. The submissive individual is light, like a dry leaf or a piece of balsa wood drifting at sea. Balsa wood has no evil, but its tragedy is its lack of density. It must obey any wind. Men and women who have reached true maturity cannot afford the luxury of being light. They have seen too many betrayals and learned lessons that youth cannot yet understand. Their duty is not to drift so as not to disturb the waves, but to become a lead anchor, heavy, silent, and absolutely immovable. The physics of heavy metals contains ancestral wisdom. Lead does not seek applause, it does not dazzle like gold. It possesses a darker virtue, its absolute density. Lead is overwhelmingly heavy and extraordinarily stable. If you throw a lead bell into the ocean, the currents above that destroy ports will not move it. Cultivating emotional density means learning the art of ceasing to react. It means abandoning the nervous urge to defend or explain yourself to those without ears to hear. Imagine a daily scenario. You make a decision based on your peace, and the world reacts. The offended family demands long explanations. In that millisecond, the habit of a lifetime will tempt you to justify yourself. You will feel the nervous impulse to speak fast, to ask for forgiveness for choosing your peace. That is the temptation to become light. Here you must invoke lead. When external blackmail hits, you must absorb the impact in absolute silence. Lead does not resonate. If you hit bronze with a hammer, it vibrates and complains loudly. But if you hit a solid block of lead, the hammer just stops dead. Lead absorbs all the kinetic energy of the aggressor and dissipates it within without flinching. It emits no note of complaint, it simply ends the movement. When someone launches a stinging criticism or poison, become lead. Listen in silence. Do not alter your deep breathing. Maintain your posture, anchored like a centennial oak. Look them in the eyes with cold serenity. Above all, do not utter a single word to relieve the tension. Silence is a lethal acoustic weapon. By not returning a defensive vibration, you instantly cut the propagation of the sound wave. The interlocutor, used to their words generating a reaction, will feel they are hitting a wall. Friction disappears. Conflict dies of suffocation. This is not stubbornness. It is the majesty of true experience and mass. EV. Sympathetic resonance and the monarch's tuning fork. By renouncing the illusion of consensus and cultivating density, you undergo a silent metamorphosis. You stop being an ordinary percussion instrument, a drum that makes noise every time life hits it, to become the tuning fork of the room. You no longer react to the acoustics, you define them with your presence. In acoustics, every object has a natural resonance frequency, a fundamental note it longs to vibrate at. When you get rid of the static of wanting to please the herd, you discover under the rubble your own fundamental note. It is the unshakable truth of who you are today, without deceptive ornaments or apologies. And here lies the deepest secret, the principle of sympathetic resonance. If in a silent music hall you strike a solid tuning fork, you do not need to bring it close to other instruments to make them sound. The wave will travel through the air, pure and constant. Any string tuned to that note will begin to sing. When a mature person assumes their truth with density and aplomb, they do not need to impose authority with shouts or threats. They do not need to give exhausting sermons to their adult children. Their simple existence in a state of unshakable calm alters the atmospheric pressure. Their truth resonates in the air. When you enter a room where chaos reigns, your task is not to raise your voice. That would be acting as a slave to noise. Your supreme task is to sit in your place of honor, breathe deeply, anchor the weight of your history, and emit, through your calm body language, the fundamental note of absolute serenity. Mass always dominates dispersion. The rock always breaks the wave. People around you, living like trembling leaves, will biologically detect the presence of a massive center of gravity. At first, they may feel uncomfortable or try to provoke you, but eventually the laws of acoustics will do their work. Those seeking stability will align with your posture. They will lower their voices, their breathing will synchronize, they will drop their masks of anguish and tune themselves by pure sympathetic resonance to your superior frequency. You will rule the room without having moved a single finger or uttered an order. Genuine respect is not taken by force. It is rendered voluntarily as a tribute to the forces of nature. It belongs to the rock against which waves crash, to the heavy cathedral bell that only rings when it has something final to announce, and to the wise elder who looks at the world's panic with a smile. Chapter 2. The Friction of Lying, Thermal Wear. A silent tragedy brews in youth and matures in adulthood, eventually suffocating the human being in old age. It is the tragedy of building a life on the fragile foundation of appearances. From our first steps in society's theater, we are handed a script. We are told what to desire and what mask to wear to be considered honorable. Throughout decades, you have been a witness and a protagonist in this exhausting drama. You have seen couples maintain empty marriages for half a century for fear of what people will say. You have seen people sustain false friendships, smiling at the Sunday table while their stomachs twist with contempt. This is the theater of complacency. In youth, the body's vigor is so immense that one can sustain this lie without noticing the damage. Vitality acts as a shield. The individual puts on the heavy mask, pretends to be who they are not, and returns home tired, but convinced they are doing the right thing. They believe life is this perpetual effort not to clash. However, as calendar pages fall and life's winter appears, nature collects its bill with relentless precision. Maintaining the decorum of an existential lie demands colossal energy. Every forced smile and every opinion kept in the silence of the throat is another stone added to the sack you carry on your back. It is heavy. There comes a morning in maturity when the individual feels their bones weigh 100 kilos more than normal. They are not physically ill, they are sick with unreality. They discover, with an intimate terror, that they have forgotten their own face. They feel a chronic exhaustion that no amount of sleep can ever repair. This tiredness is the direct result of trying to hold the wind with your hands. Living a life that does not resonate with the deepest truth of your spirit is an act of sustained violence. The lie is a physical burden. It bows the spine, dims the eyes, and withers the skin long before the biological clock dictates the end. Golden years wisdom demands an absolute purge. It requires you to look around and have the majestic courage to admit how much of your life is real and how much is a cardboard set raised not to inconvenience others. The first step to recovering vitality is to stop feeding the devouring furnace of appearances. Bet the blood of the gear and the law of heat, the physics of exhaustion. To understand how lying destroys health, we must observe the laws of thermodynamics and classical mechanics. The universe does not judge the lie with a moral code. It judges it through the physics of friction. Imagine an old locomotive engine, a beast of iron and steel designed to move thousands of tons with fluid grace. When this engine works in harmony, when parts fit with exact precision and are lubricated by pure oil, the machine advances in silence. There is no resistance. We shall call this state of mechanical grace the truth. The truth is smooth, pure, and devoid of resistance. It allows the maximum transmission of power. Now, what happens if you introduce a handful of desert sand into the gears of that perfect engine? The sand scrapes the metal. Surfaces that once glided smoothly begin to clash. The inexorable phenomenon of friction occurs. In thermodynamics, energy is not destroyed, only transformed. That lost energy becomes heat. The engine begins to heat up dangerously. Friction generates a temperature so high that the steel begins to expand, screech, and emit painful noises. If the operator does not stop and clean the sand, the thermal friction will melt the parts. The engine destroys itself from within, not for lack of force, but for thermal wear. Lying and the repression of your true will are the sand in the gears of your soul. When you sit at the table to listen to someone you detest with a polite smile, your gears enter extreme friction. Your mind wants to leave, but your body stays and smiles. That brutal contradiction generates heat. It generates wear. Sustaining a falsehood requires colossal cognitive effort. The liar needs a prodigious memory to remember which mask to use in front of each person. They have to calculate words and repress sighs. That constant calculation is a perpetual friction that consumes brain glucose and poisons rest. It is a slow incineration. Truth, conversely, requires no energy to sustain itself, because truth is a finished fact of nature. A man who speaks his truth, raw and heavy like lead, does not need a good memory. He does not need to prepare. Truth flows through his gears like the purest oil, eliminating all resistance. It is the natural state. The chronic pain of modern humanity is nothing more than the thermal wear of a life full of useless frictions. They are burning from the inside. They have spent so many decades trying to please a pitiless world that their motors have overheated to the breaking point. Nature does not forgive this internal wasting. Each day you spend tolerating an unacceptable situation or pretending an affection that has dried up. You are filing down the iron of your own life. You are burning energy intended for the majesty of your later years. To cool the motor, there is only one solution. You must remove the sand, whatever the cost. The art of letting the armor fall, the release of metal. Understanding the physics of wear is the first step, but executing the truth demands a courage few possess. Society has designed a clever trap. It makes us believe that if we stop pretending and cut relations of convenience, the world will end and we will die in absolute solitude. It is a hollow threat. The man and woman of maturity must repudiate this blackmail. They must master the art of letting the armor fall. Throughout your life, you have forged a heavy coat of mail to protect yourself from the world's judgments. It is made of obligations, traditions, and the good person image you built for neighbors. That armor was useful in the battlefield of youth, but now it weighs tons. Instead of protecting you, it prevents you from breathing. Letting the armor fall is not an act of hysterical aggression, it is an act of energy economy. When the monarch decides to stop lying, they do not ask for permission. The monarch simply releases the straps and lets the heavy metal fall to the ground. Imagine the scenario. You are expected at a social event you detest. The conditioned reflex will tell you to make a diplomatic excuse. Disarming means looking them in the eye and saying, "I will not go, it is not my desire." In that millisecond, the armor hits the ground. The sound will be deafening to those around you. Family will be scandalized. Friends of convenience will call you selfish or insensitive. The atmospheric pressure will try to crush you, so you put the armor back on. They will threaten you with the void. It is imperative that you resist that first blow. Do not pick up the armor. The noise others make is just the tantrum of those who lost their resonance box. They were used to parroting your energy, and now they panic. Their indignation is the mathematical proof that you have done the right thing. While they scream, you will experience a physical miracle. By shedding the weight of the lie, you will feel your lungs expand. A fresh relief, a cold breeze, will begin to cool your soul's motor. Jaw tension will disappear, and the knot in your stomach will undo. The back pain of holding others' worlds will fade. You will discover that the solitude promised as punishment is actually a spacious and serene sanctuary. Losing people who only loved you for your docility is not a tragedy. It is a spring cleaning. It is a hygienic purge that eliminates debris to make room for the majestic silence of your own company. Truth as a motive force, the flight without resistance. Once the motor has been cleaned and the soul's temperature has dropped to the serenity of cold stone, the individual enters a phase of existence known to very few, the phase of flight without resistance. Ordinary people think truth is just not telling lies. That is a tiny view. Truth is a motive force. When you align your intimate thoughts with your words and actions, you eliminate all friction in your nervous system. Your entire being becomes a unified block, a solid steel ram with no cracks for doubt. In this state of acoustic purity, every action you take carries 100% of your vital mass. This absence of friction grants a power that is baffling to the young. The monarch who operates without resistance no longer needs to argue to command respect. If an adult child comes to disrespect them, the monarch does not enter a screaming match. They simply emit a gaze of gravity and a blunt refusal. With no anger or need to convince, the order is processed by the universe as a finished fact, immovable as gravity. Living in the frequency of truth means you are no longer a debtor to society. You owe no explanations. Your time belongs to you completely. Your energy now flows toward your own interests. The greatest treasure of old age is sovereignty over one's own character. It is the aristocratic privilege of sitting on the porch of your life, watching the crazed world chase shadows, and knowing you no longer participate. You have handed over your last mask. You have stepped off the stage. Death and time scare those who feel they lived another's life. But for those who eradicated the friction of lying, the years are just the process of metal settling and reaching its maximum hardness. There is no greater peace than knowing that all day, not one word was said to please a fool. Chapter 3. The Principle of Sympathy, Ruling Without Touching. There is a universal tragedy that unfolds in the heart of almost every human family, a tragedy that becomes more evident and painful as hair turns grey and physical strength begins to wane. It is the drama of trying to rule the world with your hands. Since youth, society indoctrinates us with the belief that influence is an act of brute force. We are taught that to change the behavior of others, we must intervene directly. If a child strays, we believe we must chase them with sermons and reproaches. If a spouse does not understand us, we engage in discussions that last until dawn. We try to twist their will through the weight of our arguments. If society seems to sink into disorder, we feel the urge to raise our voice and complain bitterly. We call this primitive impulse, born of fear and helplessness, the illusion of physical control. Throughout your years, you have tried to apply this brute force countless times. You have invested oceans of saliva trying to convince those who did not want to be convinced. You have lost sleep trying to mold the character of loved ones, as if another's soul were a piece of clay you could sculpt with your own hands. You have argued, begged, and cried, only to discover that the other ended up doing exactly what their own nature dictated. In the autumn of life, persisting in this method is not only useless, it is biologically destructive. Your energy today is a sacred resource, a fire that must be stoked to warm your own winter. It is not to be used to melt the ice in the hearts of others. Every time you enter a heated discussion to demand respect, every time you raise your voice so your adult children listen, you are suffering a tear in your spirit. You are surrendering your peace in exchange for nothing. The bitterness that afflicts many elders comes from the defeat of pride. They suffer because they feel they have lost control over their tribe. They feel they are no longer heard, and in their desperation, they try to tighten their fist even harder, only to find the sand of others' wills escaping through their fingers. What the ordinary world ignores is that true power never operates through friction or pushing. The first cause, the individual who has reached true mastery over their existence, repudiates brute force. They understand that demanding respect is the most pathetic confession that one does not possess it. The monarch assimilates a higher law of nature. Supreme influence requires no contact. For the world to bend to your will, you must stop trying to move it with your hands and learn, once and for all, to move it with your own vibration. You become the center that commands without effort. 2. The acoustics of creation and the principle of resonance. To abandon the exhausting habit of pushing people, we must look at the perfect laws of acoustics and vibration. Nature offers the answer through the behavior of strings and metals. Imagine a concert hall designed for absolute acoustic purity. In this room, two identical cellos are placed, tuned with precision. They rest on their stands, separated by several meters. No cables join them. No visible mechanism connects them. If a musician enters and strikes the G string of the first cello, the instrument will emit a deep, beautiful sound. The wood will vibrate, creating invisible waves that travel throughout the hall. And then, the undeniable miracle of physics occurs. Without anyone touching it, the G string of the second cello will begin to vibrate on its own. It will start to sing. Sound will be born from the stationary instrument. In acoustics, this majestic phenomenon is known as sympathetic resonance. How can the second cello play the same note without being touched? The answer lies in the tuning. The sound wave hits everything: chairs, curtains, floor. But chairs do not vibrate. They are not designed for that frequency. Only the string that shares the exact same nature and tension is able to receive that energy. The wave of the first cello does not force the second string through brute force. It simply offers a frequency, and the second string has no choice but to join the choir. Human relations and respect within your family are governed by this same unshakable principle of wave physics. All your life, you have tried to be the musician running from one side of the room to the other, trying to play all instruments with your own hands to ensure they follow the same score. You have tried to tune your family by force. You used the bow of argument and criticism to tear a note from people. The result has been dissonance and broken strings. When you force a human to behave in a way that does not resonate with their internal state, you generate friction. They may obey temporarily out of fear or guilt, but that sound will be harsh, and the silence that follows will be full of resentment. The architect of his own life, the wise elder, no longer runs through the room. He has assimilated sympathetic resonance. He has understood that his only sacred responsibility is not to play the instruments of others, but to ensure his own cello is tuned with absolute perfection. If you wish for peace to reign in your home, you must not shout demanding peace. You must emit the unshakable frequency of calm. If you wish for your adult children to act with dignity, you must embody a dignity so crushing and majestic that your mere presence becomes an expanding wave of honor. You become the master tuning fork. As you vibrate with absolute purity in the note of serenity, the air around you fills with that energy. People whose souls are prepared will begin to resonate in sympathy with you. Ruling without touching is the sublime application of vibration physics upon human nature. 3. The immutability of the lighthouse and the detachment of the rescuer. For sympathetic resonance to work, one must purge the savior syndrome. As we age, we accumulate wisdom. When we see those we love about to trip, the visceral instinct pushes us to jump in front of them and try to prevent their fall. We believe it is our sacred duty to intervene at all costs. But constant intervention breaks resonance. By running after those who do not wish to be saved, you abandon your own center of gravity. You cease to be the pure note and become noise. Observe the lesson of coastal lighthouses. A lighthouse built on jagged cliffs has one mission: to guide ships. However, the lighthouse never leaves its position. When a ship veers off course, the lighthouse does not jump into the sea. It does not swim through giant waves to grab the ship's rudder by force. The lighthouse knows that if it leaves its foundations, its light will be extinguished, condemning the whole fleet. The lighthouse saves lives through its absolute immutability. It remains fixed in the rock. All it does is shine with devastating intensity, emitting its light signal, its frequency, rhythmically and perfectly. It is the captain's responsibility to see the light and turn the rudder. If the captain ignores the light, the ship will crash. The lighthouse will witness the tragedy, but it will remain upright, ready to guide the next ship that does wish to be guided. In the maturity of your existence, you must become the lighthouse of your lineage and your environment. You must renounce the painful and useless job of being a rescuer who dives into the frozen sea every time someone makes a mistake. Your children are already adults. If they take paths that lead to pain or financial ruin, you must resist the urge to abandon your center of gravity. Giving unsolicited advice is like throwing stones into the sea. It does not stop the storm, it only sinks the stone. If they ask for advice, deliver it with the brevity and weight of lead. If they do not ask, keep absolute silence. Let life, a much more effective teacher than any sermon, teach them. Your duty is not to live life for them or protect them from their own blindness. Your duty is to remain immovable in your own rectitude, peace, and well-being. You must shine with the example of a life well lived. That is your light. You govern the point of light that allows them to find their way home. Of it's the silence that orders the room, the practical application of gravity. The theory must manifest in the rawness of daily life. The test is when you are surrounded by the usual chaos of human interaction. Visualize a scene. It is Sunday. The whole family is gathered around the table. The atmosphere turns cloudy. A political comment or an old grudge between siblings breaks the harmony. Voices rise. Breathing becomes short. The room's pressure becomes saturated with hostility and white noise. Destructive interference has taken over the table. The ordinary man's instinct is to join the chaos to extinguish it. He hits the table. He raises his voice above the others, demanding respect. The monarch, who masters the frequency of truth, operates with a chilling elegance. In the instant the friction takes over, the monarch executes the noise inversion. Instead of raising his volume, the monarch turns his off completely. While the rest of the table agitates, the monarch anchors both feet. He feels the weight of the wood under his shoes. He retracts his back against the chair, opening his chest and relaxing his shoulders. Slowly, with almost imperceptible control, he begins to breathe from the abdomen, exhaling with a slowness that defies the room's panic. He says nothing. He does not look at the arguers with anger, but with the same opaque, indecipherable gaze one would use to watch rain fall through a window. In thermodynamics, heat flows toward cold until temperatures balance. In social acoustics, chaos always collapses before an absolute and serene vacuum. As the minutes pass, the gravity of your silence will begin to suck the static from the room. Arguers will realize they are acting like fools in front of a marble statue. Your refusal to participate in the indignity of the fight will generate overwhelming discomfort in the noisy ones. One by one, they will begin to deflate. They will lower their voices, feeling ashamed of their own stridency. The whole table's breathing will unconsciously seek to match the rhythm of your diaphragm. Glances will shift toward you, seeking approval or condemnation, but you will deliver only the abyss of your calm. When the chaos has died of suffocation and the room is in a tense silence, waiting for your verdict, you will not resume the discussion. You will not give a moral sermon. Doing so would validate the fight. You will simply, with a voice dense as lead, change the subject radically. You might ask for the bread or comment on the temperature, or slowly stand up to leave the table, leaving everyone with the crushing weight of knowing their behavior was so irrelevant it did not even deserve a reprimand. That is the magic of ruling without touching. You force the atoms to reorganize. The true emperor of the ecosystem is the one who sits on the throne of his own silence, radiating a force so unnegotiable that the world has no choice but to kneel, lower its voice, and tune its strings to the exact and majestic rhythm of his own breathing. Chapter 4. The Acoustic Vacuum, the Power of Physical Silence. There is a silent disease corroding the spirit of modern humanity, an affliction that leaves no marks on the skin but empties the character of men and women of their dignity. This ailment manifests as a deep, irrational, and desperate phobia of the absence of noise. If you observe closely, you will see a palpable terror of silence. When a conversation stops and silence settles in a room for more than 5 or 10 seconds, the atmospheric pressure seems to crush those present. Faces tense, gazes avert to the floor, hands seek something to touch. Silence feels intolerable, almost violent. Inevitably, someone succumbs to panic. Someone opens their mouth to fill that void. They fill it with anything. A graceless joke, a complaint about the weather, or a nervous murmur. The ordinary man feels that if he is not emitting sound, he ceases to exist. Over the years, you have surely seen how this panic ruins respect. You have seen individuals in a negotiation begin to talk without restraint, offering concessions. They lower their value simply because they could not bear the pause. You have seen parents lose authority because after giving an order, they felt obliged to fill it with long, pathetic justifications, diluting the force of their command in a sea of useless words. This terror of silence is born from deep insecurity before oneself. Noise is the perfect hiding place for those who do not wish to hear the echo of their own thoughts. Constant chatter is a desperate attempt not to be alone with one's conscience. The compulsive talker believes silence is a dead vacuum that must be filled at all costs. However, the wise soul understands that loquacity is weakness. The elder who speaks incessantly has aged in body, but his spirit remains that of a child scared in the dark. Mastery demands a different relationship with the absence of sound. Silence is not an empty room. It is a stone wall, an unexpugnable moat, a force of nature. It becomes the most devastating weapon in your arsenal. Sound is a parasite of matter. To master silence and use it as a shield and sword, we must understand the nature of noise. Sound, unlike light, is not an independent entity that can travel freely. The light of a star can cross galaxies through empty space. But sound is a mechanical wave. It is a parasite that needs a host to exist. It needs a medium. In classical physics, sound is a vibration that pushes molecules. When you speak, your vocal cords push air molecules in a chain reaction. Sound needs air, water, or solid matter to travel. If there is no matter, sound cannot exist. This law leads us to one of the most beautiful phenomena of the cosmos, the absolute vacuum. In the vastness of outer space, there is no air. There is a perfect vacuum. If a star explodes into a supernova, that explosion occurs in absolute and sepulchral silence. There is no roar, no echo. Extreme violence develops in perfect stillness because there are no particles to carry the noise. It is a terrifying peace. This lesson can be proven in a laboratory. If you place a bell inside a thick glass dome and remove all the air, a miracle occurs. You will see the hammer hitting the metal frantically. You will see the violence of the movement. However, you will hear absolutely nothing. By removing oxygen, you robbed sound of its vehicle. Noise dies suffocated before crossing the glass. This is the mechanics of power for the mature individual. The hostility of others, the insults, the chronic complaints, and the attempts at manipulation are like the hammer hitting the bell. They are external mechanical vibrations that desperately need a medium to propagate. What is the medium for others' attacks? Your own reaction. When someone attacks you with words, they emit a mechanical wave. For that wave to hurt you or steal your peace, it needs you to offer the air of your attention. It needs you to get angry, respond, or justify. Your reaction is the oxygen that lets the sound travel. The weak man provides this air constantly. At an offense, he shouts. At a claim, he defends. He allows the noise of the other to invade his life. The monarch, who governs the acoustics of his soul, acts as the pump that removes the air from the dome. He offers no resistance. He simply generates an absolute vacuum, the withdrawal of oxygen and the suffocation of others' fire. Applying the acoustic vacuum is an act of sublime crudeness. It requires mastering biological impulses to replace them with a calculating immobility. Visualize a situation. Someone in your environment decides to cross a line. They speak with a high tone or a venomous reproach, expecting you to formulate a defense. If you give them that reaction, you have lost. You have given sound a place to bounce. Execution demands that, in that second of aggression, you suspend all animation in your face and body. You must turn off any trace of visible emotion. Anchor your feet. Your face must become a mask of carved stone. No sarcasm. Your eyes must look directly at the interlocutor, but with the cold, deep gaze of one observing a distant weather phenomenon. Your breathing must be slow and silent. When the aggressor finishes, expecting the inevitable response, you execute the final blow. You say nothing. You allow the clock to tick. 5 seconds. Maintain eye contact with a blood-chilling fixity. Do not nod. Do not move. Turn your body and mind into a vast extension of outer space. The impact on the ordinary human is devastating. The aggressor threw a flare expecting to find dry wood in you to start a fire. Instead, they found the vacuum of space. Longed silence has an incalculable physical weight. It is a pressure that crushes the lungs of those not prepared. Without your defense to hide them, the aggressor will hear how ridiculous or insolent their own claim sounded. It is then that you will witness the suicide of the other's will. They will panic. Unable to bear the weight of the empty room, they will try to fill it. Their aggression will turn into nervousness. They will give unasked explanations. They will stutter and retreat. In their desperation for a sign of life from you, they will drown in the vacuum you designed. You won't have even opened your lips. The sealing of the vault and the sovereignty of the pause. The mastery of the acoustic vacuum is also the most exquisite tool for governing daily negotiations. The world moves at a hysterical speed. Immaturity believes speed is efficiency. People live in constant reactivity, bouncing like rubber balls against others' demands. The mature man repudiates haste. He understands that the control of time is the control of the universe, and time is controlled through the pause. When you receive an offer or an important question, society expects you to react to the questioner's rhythm. Applying the acoustic vacuum means taking the metronome and stopping it with your hands. If someone proposes a deal, do not respond immediately. Even if you know the answer, do not give them the satisfaction of immediacy. Immediacy cheapens the value of your word. What is given too fast is perceived as light. Listen to the proposal. Receive the words. Then let the silence settle. Look at them. Let the pause stretch longer than ordinary courtesy dictates. In those seconds of immobility, you are imposing your rhythm. You are demonstrating that their urgency is not yours. You are closing the heavy steel doors of your vault. This deliberate pause completely alters the balance of power. The person waiting will feel the weight of gravity. They will feel that their request has entered a slow and powerful machinery. When you finally break that silence, your answer will not sound like a servant's reaction, but like the irrevocable decree of a supreme judge. Words from silence have density. The fortress of voided air. Learning to be silent is not simply closing your mouth. It is an act of expansive will. It is occupying the room with the weight of your immutability. The acoustic vacuum is the definitive testament of self-sufficiency. He who needs to shout needs to be heard. All noise is a plea for help. By establishing the doctrine of the vacuum, you pull out the need to be helped. You become a closed, hermetic system. Like dead stars that collapse to become spheres of infinite gravity, you absorb light and sound without letting anything escape. In maturity, you must have the coldness of metal. When you assimilate the power of physical silence, your life transforms into an unexpugnable fortress. Insults slide against the polished walls of your indifference. Enemies, finding nowhere to strike, exhaust themselves, hitting the air and eventually retreat, fearful of a presence they cannot alter. Practice the art of the empty room. In your next conversation, be the last to speak. In your next disagreement, allow the other to spend all their saliva while you observe them like one watching the rain. Do not interrupt. Do not nod. Become the glass dome from which all oxygen has been extracted. You will discover that you need no effort to impose your will. The universe is full of people desperate to give their power to the first one who proves they do not need it. There is no greater demonstration that you need nothing from the world than the act of looking at it and denying it the sound of your voice. Chapter 5. The gravity of the word, the weight of the verb. If you stop to observe the theatre of the world with the slow and critical gaze granted by the years, you will discover one of the most silent and destructive tragedies of our era: the absolute devaluation of language. Humanity has forgotten the sacred character of the verb. We walk through squares and sit at family tables where the air is saturated. The air is perpetually saturated with empty words, broken promises, sterile complaints, and unsolicited opinions. We have turned nature's highest gift, the ability to articulate thought, into an incessant stream of worthless noise. We shall call this disease of the will the epidemic of levity. Levity is the tragic condition of the ordinary man. Observe those around you. They talk from sunrise to sunset. They talk to fill the silence, because silence terrifies them. They talk to justify their failures, weaving long and complex excuses that no one asked for. They talk to project an image of themselves that does not match the reality of their acts. They promise eternal love in a sigh. They swear loyalty in a toast and threaten their children with terrible punishments that they will never have the courage to execute. What is the result of this verbal incontinence? Inflation. In the economy of nations, when a government prints paper money without rest and without the backing of gold in its vaults, money loses its value. A bill that yesterday bought a banquet today barely covers a loaf of bread. The paper remains the same, but its purchasing power has disintegrated. In the economy of the human spirit, exactly the same thing occurs. When an individual emits words without rest, without the gold of actions, their language suffers hyperinflation. Their words lose the ability to buy the respect of others. Surely you know elderly men and women who suffer this tragedy. They are those elders who constantly threaten, complain about everything, or demand respect by raising their voices. However, no one in the family listens to them. Their children ignore their warnings. Their friends nod, but inside they yawn. These people suffer because they feel the world has marginalized them. But the world ignores them because their words have become too light. They are like balloons full of hot air, very flashy, very noisy when they burst, but lacking all mass. A balloon cannot break a window or sink a ship. Youth can afford the luxury of levity, for they are still playing at discovering who they are. But in maturity, verbal incontinence is a suicide of character. To reach the autumn of life and continue throwing words to the wind is the mark of the slave. The man who does not control his tongue is a prisoner of his own impulses. He is a guardian who has left the gates of his fortress open for his most precious treasure to escape in torrents. Sovereignty demands that you close the doors of that vault. Respect is not earned by talking louder or longer. Respect is earned when the world discovers that language has ceased to be a light breath and become a heavy metal. The physics of mass and the deformation of space. To abandon the vice of chatter and recover the scepter of your own authority, we must turn our gaze from social customs to the supreme laws of the physical universe. We must understand the incorruptible relationship between volume, mass, density, and gravity. Imagine two spheres of exactly the same size, say, the size of a melon. Both occupy the same volume in space. However, the first sphere is made of hollow balsa wood, carved with fine ornaments. The second sphere is cast in pure lead, solid from its core to its surface. If you take the hollow wooden sphere and throw it on a bed of wet sand, it will bounce clumsily and sit on the surface. It will barely leave a mark. If a strong wind blows, the sphere will roll away. But if you take the lead sphere and drop it from the same height, the result is an act of thermodynamic violence. The lead does not bounce. It crashes against the sand, sinking the surface, displacing the earth, and creating a deep crater. The difference is not volume, the size of your speech, but density, the mass contained in that speech. Isaac Newton's physics teaches us that gravity is the force of attraction proportional to mass. Massive objects do not need to chase light objects. The Earth does not chase the moon. Its mass curves the fabric of space. It creates a gravitational slope that forces the moon to orbit around it. Your words are subject to this same law of celestial mechanics. The ordinary individual produces hollow wooden words. He speaks with a gigantic volume. He fills the room with his anecdotes. But because those words lack the backing of action, they weigh nothing. Lacking mass, they have no gravitational force. They do not attract respect or impose order. The words of the slave bounce off others' ears and are swept away by the first wind of distraction. The monarch, who has forged his spirit in the forge of years, assimilates the physics of lead. He repudiates hollow volume. He understands that density is mass divided by volume. To make his words infinitely dense, he performs two operations. First, he drastically reduces the volume of what he says. He eliminates the fluff and the complaints. Second, he increases the mass, ensuring each syllable is backed by the unmovable weight of his acts. When the monarch finally opens his mouth in a crisis, he is not throwing a wooden sphere. He is dropping a block of solid lead in the center of the table. The acoustic and psychological impact of that dense word deforms the space around it. The crater it leaves in the minds of listeners is deep and indelible. His words generate a gravity of their own. People around him, caught in that orbit, feel the force of his will pushing them, ordering them to align with the truth just pronounced. The monarch does not need to raise his voice to be obeyed, because gravity does not shout. It simply crushes and subdues. 3. The abolition of the promise and the forge of the decree. Acquiring this density requires you to mutilate from your vocabulary one of the most common and destructive habits, the habit of promising. The promise is the tool of the beggar and the comfort of the weak. When a person says, "I promise I will change tomorrow," they are asking for credit in advance. They are issuing a post-dated check, hoping the other person will trust there will be funds in the bank account of their will when the time comes to cash it. As we age, we realize the cemetery of human relationships is paved with broken promises. The slave promises because he lacks the strength to act in the present. He uses the promise to escape imminent conflict. But the promise weakens the spirit because it moves responsibility toward an uncertain future where the wind of circumstances may blow against good intentions. The individual who seeks mastery over his existence promises absolutely nothing. He has abolished it. In place of promising, the monarch executes the decree. The difference is the same as that between wishing for rain and witnessing a lightning strike. The promise is a hope. The decree is the description of a physical fact already set in motion. When the blacksmith plunges the red-hot sword into ice water, it hardens. The blacksmith does not promise the sword will be hard. The act of tempering is the guarantee. Similarly, the monarch does not tell his family, "I promise I will put order in this house." The monarch sits in the solemn silence of his authority, and when he speaks, his words are the ice water tempering reality. He says, "As of today, the rules of this home have changed. This will no longer be tolerated." And then he is silent. There is no need for oaths or appealing to the heavens as witnesses. The decree does not seek the audience's agreement. It is not the start of a debate or a proposal. It is a sentence. For the decree to have the weight of lead, The execution must be instant and welded to the word. If you decree you will cut financial aid to an adult child who is wasting your wealth, the moment the word leaves your mouth, the vault key must turn. There is no trial period. There are no second warnings. Crossing the limit means crashing into the stone wall of your immutability. It is this perfect alignment between the word spoken and the action executed that grants the tongue its most sacred power. When your environment learns that your yes is a mountain and your no is an abyss, the dynamic changes. People will stop trying to manipulate you. They will stop haggling. They will know that trying to convince you to break your word is an act of madness, as useless as trying to convince the tide not to rise. You will have transformed your verb, once light and vulnerable, into a sovereign force of nature. IV, the prior silence and the testament of the rock. Mastery over the weight of words is not achieved solely by choosing vocabulary. It is based on the titanic capacity to endure the tension of the silence that precedes articulation. The forging of the heavy word occurs on the anvil of the prior silence. Observe those who lack authority. When asked a difficult question or forced to make a decision, their reaction is automatic. They open their mouth the instant the question ends. They let panic or a bruised ego answer for them. Words fall from their mouths like loose coins from the pocket of a scared man fleeing in the night. This is subjection. The immediate response is the mark of the subordinate. He who responds quickly proves the other's haste is more important than his own peace. The monarch repudiates haste. He institutes the calibration silence. Imagine a meeting where the fate of family wealth is discussed and moods are heated. Suddenly the attention turns to you. They demand an answer. They throw the weight of chaos and expect an immediate reaction. You, anchored in the sovereignty of your years, do not obey that rhythm. You close your mouth. You inhale the air with a slowness that defies the panic of those present. Let the clock tick. 5 seconds. In that abyss of suspended time, you are weighing the word. Like an old jeweler who takes a gem with tweezers and places it on a precision scale, you weigh the answer against the silence. Is this word heavier than the silence it will break? Is this word a decree? If the scale tips towards silence, you swallow it. You do not speak it. Let silence continue to rule. But if the scale indicates the word is lead, a decree that must manifest to order the cosmos, then you open your lips. Because of the prior silence you imposed, the tension in the room will be at its maximum. People will be leaning forward, desperate to hear you. You have created an acoustic vacuum. When you finally speak, you will do so with a lower tone of voice than the others. You won't need to raise your voice because everyone will be keeping silent to hear you. Your syllables will fall like granite blocks. You will not give collateral explanations or apologize for your stance. You will say strictly what is necessary for the truth to be exposed, and then you will close your lips again, sealing the vault. The impact is absolute. Others will feel the physical weight of your intervention. They cannot argue. In the sunset of existence, when the physical body loses its agility, the only tool of domain left is the incalculable power of character and the gravity of the verb. An elder who speaks for the sake of speaking is a nuisance, but an elder who only pronounces dense and true decrees is a revered patriarch. He is the oracle youth turns to when the storm rages, because they know in his words they will find the firm rock upon which the world can be rebuilt. This is the frequency of truth. It resides in the capacity to be silent until the soul aches, and to open the mouth only when you will back it with acts. The man who manages to make his words weigh more than his own body has conquered the death of irrelevance. He has ceased to be an echo to become the very voice of gravity, a force that orders and rules the destiny of his blood, proving that power is the majesty of a silence broken only to dictate law. Chapter 6. The Echo of the Ancestors. Cutting the Reverberation. There is an invisible threshold in the journey of human life, a turning point that usually coincides with the arrival of grey hair and the slowing of steps. It is the moment when the individual accumulates more past than future. In this stage, the world imposes one of its most subtle and devastating traps. It is the glorification of memory and the cult of historical pain. We shall call this tragic habit of dragging dead days into the light of the present, darkening the only portion of time that truly belongs to us, the noise of the ancestors. If you observe closely the gatherings of those in the autumn of their lives, you will notice a pattern. Their conversations rarely revolve around the majesty of today or the firmness of current decisions. Instead, their mouths pour out an inexhaustible stream of ancient stories. They speak of betrayals from 30 years ago, as if the wound were still bleeding on the table. They speak of missed opportunities and parents who failed to love them. The ordinary individual is inhabited by ghosts. Their mind is a crowded pantheon where the dead never rest in peace. Society, wrapped in cheap sentimentalism, applauds this behavior. They tell us to honor our past and that our scars define us. They teach us to cling to nostalgia with the devotion of a gardener watering poison. But nature, in its infinite and icy wisdom, does not recognize nostalgia as a virtue. It recognizes it as a lead anchor tied to the neck of a man swimming toward shore. The result is overwhelming biological wear. The elder who cannot let go of their story becomes a prisoner of a time that no longer exists. They lose authority. No one respects a king who rules over a kingdom of ashes. Their gaze becomes glassy, focused on a horizon left behind. Their character sours. Vitality evaporates in the effort to keep the flames of old grudges alive, feeding fires with the scarce wood left to warm their final winters. Memory becomes an uninhabitable space. When you allow old offenses and the echoes of youthful failures to resonate in your head every morning, you annihilate the sacred space of the present. The original pain may have lasted a single day, but the habit of remembering has turned it into a decades-long sentence. The sovereign must understand that the past is dead land. The voices of those who hurt you are simply noise. It is a useless and parasitic din that prevents you from hearing the only sound with the power to alter matter and rule the world, the heavy, clean, and absolute vibration of your own will in the day of today. You must silence the ancestors to hear the monarch. Hear the architecture of caves and the law of reverberation, the physics of resonance. To dismantle the prison of memory, we must abandon the psychology of lament and dive into the inflexible laws of architectural acoustics. The physics of sound reveals with mathematical exactness why the past haunts us and how we can silence it forever. Imagine you are inside a colossal cave or an abandoned Gothic cathedral. The walls, floor, and ceiling are built with bare, cold, hard, and perfectly polished stone. You stand in the center of this stone darkness and give a single, loud, dry shout. What happens to the energy of your voice? In an open field, it would dissipate in the distance and die in a fraction of a second, absorbed by the earth. But inside the stone cave, physics imposes the law of reverberation. The sound wave hits the stone wall. Since stone is immensely hard and lacks porosity, it cannot absorb kinetic energy. Instead, it reflects the wave almost entirely. The sound bounces to the opposite wall, the ceiling, and the floor in thousands of directions. The original shout lasted barely half a second. However, due to the hardness of the walls, the thousands of reflections overlap, creating a dense and confusing sound tail that can take 15 seconds to die. This phenomenon of artificial prolongation is called reverberation time. Normal conversation there would be a disaster. The echo of the first word would mix with the second, saturating the space with an unintelligible roar. Your mind, when not educated in the discipline of forgetting, operates exactly like this stone cave. Traumas and betrayals are the original shouts. Someone offended you 40 years ago. That was the sound strike. The event occurred, and the sender stopped shouting decades ago. Why do you still hear the offense today? Because you built the walls of your spirit with the hard stone of pride, resentment, and victimhood. By refusing to let go, you have hardened the walls of your soul. Your mind cannot absorb the impact of the memory. The memory bounces. It hits the wall of your morning and the ceiling of your insomnia. The ordinary man lives with an eternal reverberation time. He walks dragging a cloud of confusing echoes. He becomes deaf to opportunity and unable to rule his family with justice, for he is always punishing the present for the past. Acoustics have no mercy. As long as your inner walls are made of resentful stone, the pain will bounce until you die. To silence the noise, you cannot catch sound waves with your hands. You must change the material of your own existence. You must transition from stone to an acoustically dead material. Third, the coating of absolute acceptance, the monarch's tuning. When a sound engineer faces a room with disastrous reverberation, he does not reason with the sound. He does not ask waves to stop bouncing. He knows the only way to purify the air is to alter the physical nature of the environment. He lines the hard stone walls with acoustically dead materials, heavy velvet or high-density wool. These materials possess an extraordinary virtue. When the violent sound wave hits heavy velvet, the material does not resist with hardness. It yields microscopically. In that yielding, the energy penetrates the pores and, through silent friction, transforms into heat. The sound does not bounce, it is absorbed. The transmutation to the serene majesty of the first cause demands the immediate installation of these absorbent panels in your spirit. We shall call this dense material absolute acceptance. It is not the weak forgiveness preached by moralists. The monarch accepts the past for acoustic survival and energy economy. Absolute acceptance means recognizing with the coldness of an ice block that what happened, happened. The betrayal, the ingratitude, and the financial ruin are unmovable facts, history written in indelible ink. The reactive individual fights these facts, raging at injustice. That rage is the stone the memory bounces against. The monarch, instead, deploys the heavy velvet of immutability. When the memory of pain tries to assault him, he does not resist. He does not oppose it with anger. He lets the memory hit his absolute acceptance. Yes, I was betrayed. Yes, I lost years. This is exactly what had to happen, because it is what happened. By installing this premise, the monarch alters the physics of his mind. The wave of painful memory hits acceptance and, finding no resistance of wounded pride, cannot bounce. The energy of the trauma penetrates the density of the monarch's character and dies in absolute silence. This is a sacred act of maturity. No one will come from the past to apologize and calm your pain. If you wait for the world to repair your acoustics, you will die deafened by noise. You must take the tools of your will and cushion the walls of your soul. Tragedies are just data. They are dust. They are nothing. By denying the past permission to bounce, by denying that permission, you execute the greatest act of authority. You close the door to the cave of laments and enter the most powerful room in nature, the anechoic chamber of your own mind at peace. The echoes stop. The present begins. You are finally alone with your own frequency. Ivy, the sovereignty of clean space and the voice of gravity. Once the monarch has coated his spirit with absolute acceptance, he experiences a physical rebirth. The world remains chaotic and dangerous, but the internal acoustics are purified. He has created a space clean of static. The first miracle is the return of clarity. In an acoustically dead room, even a pin drop is clear. When the elder is no longer stunned by past traumas, his senses sharpen. He sees intentions with clinical precision. He detects the lie in a false ally's voice because his internal radar is no longer jammed by his own laments. He recovers X-ray vision. He no longer projects old enemies onto the people of his present. The second miracle is the recovery of the gravity of his own voice. In a space full of echoes, no one can understand what you say. Authority is diluted. But when the soul's walls have absorbed the noise of the past, the slightest whisper possesses a thundering density. He stops talking like a victim. His body language undergoes a geological transmutation. The back, once bowed under useless memories, rises as a marble pillar. The face loses the bitter tension of resentment and acquires the icy placidity of the sovereign. When he sits at the table, the aura of clean silence is suffocating for the ordinary man. Others feel they are before an organism that owes nothing to anyone and has no pending accounts with yesterday. He cannot be manipulated by guilt or nostalgia. If someone tries to use a past argument for emotional blackmail, the wave of manipulation hits the monarch and disintegrates instantly. He does not debate. His response, born from the inner acoustic vacuum, cuts the air like a sword forged in ice. What happened belongs to the dust. My decision is ruled only by what weighs today. This ability to operate exclusively in the present frame turns old age into the stage of greatest tactical lethality. The monarch expropriates all power by concentrating on the exact millisecond his lungs fill with air. Cutting the echo of ancestors is the baptism of maturity. You did not come to this world to be an archivist of sorrows. You came to forge an empire of tranquility that no shadow has the power to alter. The man who purges the sound of his yesterday has conquered death before dying. He demonstrated his spirit is denser than his history. He sits in the chair of his life, surrounded by the majestic silence of acceptance, understanding that the greatest victory is making the past acoustically irrelevant. Chapter 7. The Emotions Pendulum, the Center of Mass. If a truly tragic spectacle exists in the theater of human existence, it is that of a man or woman who has reached the maturity of their years, with graying hair and a map of battles on their skin, but who still bounces at the mercy of their own emotions like a scared child at a fair. The modern world has glorified emotional instability. It has disguised it with beautiful words like passion or intensity. We shall call this destructive addiction, this habit of surrendering inner peace to the whim of external winds, the noise of the pendulum. Observe the ordinary crowd. Their lives are roller coasters, dictated entirely by events they do not control. When destiny or economy grants them a victory, a new grandchild, a lucrative deal, they explode in excessive euphoria. Their chest inflates with the arrogance of uncontrolled joy. But nature does not forgive the lack of balance. Days or months later, the wind changes. Disease, betrayal, or a simple lack of respect arrives. And that same individual who yesterday touched the sky today collapses into a pit of paralyzing despair. They curse their luck and complain bitterly of the universe's cruelty. Society consoles this individual. They are told it is human to feel. What no one says with clinical bluntness is that living this way is a hemorrhage of vital energy. Reacting with violence to external stimuli is not a sign of vitality. It is a symptom of structural weakness. It is proof that you have no center of gravity of your own. Hysterical joy and deep sadness consume immense amounts of biological energy. They fatigue the muscles. In youth, the body endures this abuse. But in the winter of life, this constant friction oxidizes the soul and ages the face with terrifying speed. The sovereign must repudiate the tyranny of runaway emotion. Extreme joy is as dangerous as deep pain, for both tear you from your throne and make you a slave to circumstances. Maturity demands you stop applauding like a buffoon when it rains gold, so you do not have to cry like a beggar when it hails. It demands a majestic apathy where victory and defeat are received equally. The mechanics of the pendulum and the law of energy conservation. To understand exactly why euphoria always breeds misery, we must abandon romantic poetry and dive into pure physics. We must observe the classical mechanics of the simple pendulum. Imagine a heavy pendulum, a large iron sphere suspended from a steel cable. When at rest, it hangs in perfect verticality. This is the equilibrium point, or dead center. In this position, the iron sphere has no potential energy. Gravity pulls it directly toward the Earth's center. It is a state of absolute stability. If no wind pushes it, the sphere can remain there, motionless and in silence, for all eternity. But suppose you intervene. You push that heavy sphere with force to the right, raising it into the air. That right side represents euphoria, triumph, and extreme pleasure. By pushing it up against gravity, you are introducing energy. In mechanics, this is called gravitational potential energy, EP. You hold it high on the right, believing you can keep it there forever, believing happiness is a state that can be frozen. But arms tire and life's circumstances always change. Sooner or later, you will have to release the sphere. And when you do, the first law of thermodynamics will dictate its relentless sentence. The sphere will not stop gently in the center. All that potential energy will transform into pure and violent kinetic energy. The iron sphere will fall at full speed, cross the blind center, and by unnegotiable inertia, rise with the exact same violence toward the left side. That left side is despair and tragedy. Physics has no morality, no mercy, and accepts no excuses. If you push the pendulum 1 meter toward extreme joy, physics guarantees it will swing 1 meter toward extreme pain. Every excessive pleasure you seek is an energy debt you are acquiring with nature, and nature always collects its debts with blood. The bitter elder is the one who spent their life pushing the pendulum toward euphoria and was surprised when the iron ball broke their ribs on its return from the left. They cry for money they once adored. By loving transitory things with frantic intensity, they built the very guillotine that now cuts their peace. The monarch assimilates the mechanics and refuses to touch the sphere. When the world offers a brilliant triumph, he does not push the pendulum to the right. He observes victory and thanks it in silence, but does not alter his pulse. He keeps it in the dead center. Thus, no energy is stored for despair. 4. Pain will try to push the sphere to the left, but since the monarch has cultivated immense spiritual density, the blow is absorbed quickly and the pendulum returns to center in an instant. The monarch suffers, for he is flesh, but he is not destroyed because he refuses to abandon the majestic immobility of dead center. And the center of mass and the lead keel, the monarch's tuning, to maintain the pendulum in the center, while life's storms strike the walls of your house, you must master a fundamental principle of naval engineering, the center of mass. Have you ever wondered why old sailing ships, despite huge masts catching hurricanes, do not capsize and sink in the middle of the ocean? Simple logic would say the wind should easily overturn it. The secret of survival is not found above in the sails, it is found below, submerged in the darkness and the cold of the sea. At the bottom of the hull of every great ship exists a structure called a keel. In ocean sailors, that keel is ballasted with lead. This ballast lowers the ship's center of mass dramatically. The center of gravity is not on the deck, it is underwater. When the hurricane pushes the ship to one side, the immense weight of the lead at the bottom acts as a lever in the opposite direction. The harder the wind pushes, the harder gravity pulls. It is a self-correcting force. The ship shakes but never founder because its fundamental anchor weighs more than the wind. The ordinary man, reacting with euphoria and depression, is a ship without a keel. His center of mass is in his head and volatile emotions. He is top-heavy. Any wind of criticism is enough to sink him. Mastery of old age demands you take all your emotional energy and sink it downward. It demands forging a lead keel in your own spirit. Lowering your center of mass is physical and moral. Physically, it means abandoning short, anxious chest breathing and forcing deep, slow breaths from the diaphragm. It means walking, feeling the weight of your shoes against the earth. It means sitting, letting the weight of your history sink into the wood. Morally, it means moving your value from external things to your own integrity. If your peace depends on others, your center of mass is outside your boat. The monarch founds his lead keel on one principle. My self-respect is absolute, my history is written, and nothing that happens out there today has the density to make me doubt who I am. By installing this keel, you become invulnerable to oscillation. When fortune comes, your internal lead says, "This is fleeting," and the ship rights itself. When tragedy hits, your internal lead says, "I have survived worse storms. This flesh will age, but my dignity is immovable." And the ship, creaking in its wood but firm in its purpose, will right itself once more, breaking the wave and navigating in the darkness with majesty. Fee cutting the rope, the silence of zero friction. The theory of immutability must translate into surgical actions on the battlefield of daily life. A moment will come when the world will test your newly forged gravity. The human environment is a predatory organism. It hates those who escaped its emotional game and will do everything to swing your pendulum again. It may be a provocateur in your own family who knows your old weak spots and launches a stinging comment designed to make you explode. It may be a false flatterer trying to seduce you so you lower your guard. In both cases, the aggressor is trying to grab the iron sphere and push it to the extremes. The aggressor needs you to react in order to exist. In this instant, the monarch executes the supreme maneuver, cutting the rope. When the pendulum of insult or flattery is thrown at you, do not put your hands out to stop it by force. Stopping force with force generates friction and thermal wear. Instead of pushing back, you will pull out the scissors of structured apathy and cut the steel cable that holds the emotion. Physically, this manifests through the gaze of the abyss and dense silence. The provocateur launches the insult. Your animal instinct will ask you to shout and defend your honor. But a king's honor is not defended with shouts. It is a geological fact. You will close your mouth. Your breathing will drop to your belly. You will not blink. You will fix your eyes on the provocateur, but you will not look at their face. You will look through them as if observing a wall behind them. Your face will lose all expression of anger or sadness. It will become the death mask of an ancient pharaoh. The silence that follows will not be that of a coward. It will be the crushing silence of tactical indifference. By cutting the rope of reaction, the provocateur's energy finds no resistance. The attack falls into the void, like a sword trying to cut water. The aggressor, realizing they have failed to move the victim's center of mass, will experience deep terror. They will feel the humiliation of having spent their gunpowder firing at a stone mountain. They will be exposed in their own stridency. Old age is the ultimate opportunity for the supremacy of stillness. Accepting that pain and joy are simple passing winds that brush the sails of your ship, without ever being able to reach the keel of your identity, is the ultimate expression of freedom. You no longer need to flee from the storms. You have discovered that the safest, quietest, and most powerful place in the entire ocean is not in a distant port, but in the dark and frozen depths of your own unshakable and infinite center of mass. Chapter 8. The Tuning of Steel. Pain as Tension. If you observe with a sharp gaze the doctrine that modern society imposes on the human being, you will discover a lie so seductive and poisonous that it has managed to bend the most brilliant minds and the strongest bodies. It is the lie of absolute rest. As hair whitens and years accumulate, the world whispers a treacherous promise. It tells you that you have already suffered enough, that you have worked sufficiently, and that you have therefore earned the divine right to softness. We have been convinced that the supreme goal of old age is absolute comfort, fleeing the cold, avoiding physical effort, and seeking the refuge of a padded chair where no storm can touch us. We shall call this dogma of voluntary decay the epidemic of softness. In the eyes of a cowardly culture, which adores superficial youth and is terrified by the passage of time, pain and difficulty are seen as errors of the universe, as unfair punishments to escape at any price. Society offers pills to numb every discomfort and excuses. But nature, the only unbribable judge of reality, abhors softness. Observe what occurs biologically and spiritually with the individual who accepts this lie. By ceasing to subject the body to the tension of effort, muscles atrophy with terrifying speed, bones become porous, and blood flows with the sluggishness of a stagnant river. By ceasing to subject the mind to the tension of complex problems and strict discipline, the intellect clouds, memory fades, and character, once firm as oak, becomes whining, irritable, and dependent. The elder who embraces softness becomes a slave to their own comforts. Their world shrinks. A simple change in weather terrifies them. They demand respect simply for having gray hair, ignoring that the universe never respects weakness. They suffer the most humiliating tragedy. They become a heavy object for their lineage, not due to the natural wear of time, but because of their own refusal to continue sustaining the tension of existence and the weight of life. Peace is not found in the absence of difficulty. Absolute rest is, in the physics of the universe, the state of death. Life is movement, resistance, and friction. The man and woman who wish to crown their years with the sovereignty of monarchs must repudiate the siren song of comfort with disgust. Pain is a tool for the spirit. You must understand that pain, effort, and discipline are not your enemies, but the exact tools that the architect of the cosmos uses to prevent your soul from rusting and rotting in the corner of oblivion. Only through tension can the instrument be played. Only through the forge can the blade be sharpened. Magnetic tension and the piano's acoustics, the physics of resonance. To dismantle the blasphemy of comfort and understand the true purpose of difficulty in the mature stage of life, we must observe acoustics and metallurgy. We must study the behavior of string instruments and the forging of steel. Imagine a concert grand piano. a majestic beast of polished wood and cast iron designed for sound. If you lift the lid of that piano, you will see inside more than 200 strings of pure steel. Suppose the manufacturer, fearing to hurt the steel or wishing to keep the strings in a state of relaxation, decides to leave them loose, limp, and without tension. If a master pianist sits down and strikes the keys, what then? There will be no music. The felt hammer will strike the limp steel, and the result will be a flabby, dull, sad, and thudding noise. A dry and lifeless hit that will not travel more than a meter away. Steel without tension cannot vibrate. Failing to vibrate, it cannot displace the air. It has no voice. It has no authority. For that same steel to sing with crystalline clarity, to emit a majestic note capable of moving the soul, the steel must be subjected to brutal physical punishment. The tuner must take a heavy metal wrench, fit it onto the pin, and begin to pull the string. He must stretch the steel without mercy. Tension increases. The metal string is dragged almost to its breaking point. In a modern grand piano, the sum of the tension of all the stretched strings reaches the monstrous figure of 20 tons of continuous pressure on the cast iron frame. 20 tons of pure, constant, and unnegotiable physical tension. Only under this state of agony, only under this extreme tension that defies the laws of elasticity, does the steel string acquire its true nature. When the hammer strikes it now, the tense string cuts the air like an invisible whip, generating a perfect, defined, and heavy sound wave. In sound physics, the frequency is proportional to the tension. Greater tension means greater speed at which the wave travels through the material and a purer, more piercing voice. Your spirit, your character, and your body operate under this same and implacable thermodynamic law. When you flee effort, your internal strings loosen. You lose tension and you lose your resonance. When life's inevitable blows hit you, you no longer resonate. You do not emit a clear or firm response. You only emit the flabby noise of complaint, the dull lament of the scared elder. The monarch assimilates the physics of acoustics and embraces the tuner's wrench. He understands that resistance is the key. Cold, physical weight, arduous study, and the stoic confrontation of tragedy are the turn of the pin. They are the tension needed so your character does not slacken. To emit the frequency of truth, your entire being must be tensed like the steel of a concert piano, sustained by the frame of your own dignity. 3. The embrace of the anvil and contempt for the analgesic, the monarch's tuning. The transition from the lethargy of softness toward the tension of steel requires an act of deliberate psychological violence. You must declare war on your own comfort. The world will try to seduce you daily with analgesics for the body and the soul. They will offer you the easy way out in the face of any conflict. The individual seeking to be crowned in maturity executes the anvil protocol. The anvil does not flee the hammer, it receives it, because it knows that it is in the brutal collision between hammer and anvil where red-hot iron is transformed into a sword. For the monarch, voluntary pain and discipline are the hammer. Physically, this means repudiating the idea that the aging body must wither in inaction. While your lungs breathe, muscle must know resistance. The monarch lifts weight not for vanity, but for structural necessity. He subjects his bones to the load to force them to re-densify. He resists the urge to slouch. If the water is cold, he does not retreat. He uses it to light the internal furnace of his metabolism. He shows the biomass that deterioration is fought in the trenches of effort. Mentally and emotionally, tuning steel requires even greater cruelty. It requires you to refuse to look away when the truth hurts. Imagine discovering a betrayal or realizing a lifelong investment has failed. The man of loose strings will seek excuses. He will blame the government or bad luck. He will try to anesthetize the pain of loss with false illusions or by drowning in lament. He will let himself be comforted by white lies. The monarch expels the comforters from the room. He closes the door and sits alone with the tragedy. He does not take the analgesic of denial. He observes the wound head-on, with eyes wide open. He feels the pain of betrayal with all its searing rawness. In that millisecond of agony, he turns the pin. He uses extreme pain not to destroy himself, but to tense his string. I have been deceived. I have lost. This is objective reality, he decrees. I will not deceive myself with false hopes. I assume the blow. This pain is the pressure that adjusts my character. My core is denser. What remains is steel. By processing tragedy this way, the monarch transforms suffering into authority. Pain ceases to be an executioner to become his master of arms. This capacity to digest adversity without sugar, without complaints, and without fleeing creates an acoustic density in his presence that is terrifying to the weak. When people in your environment face a crisis, they will run in circles, prey to panic. The wind of chaos will knock them down. But when they look toward you, they will see an organism that has been subjected to immensely superior pressures and remains immovable. They will see the 20 tons of tension. B. The Song of Tempered Steel and the Swan Song. The climax of this physical and spiritual doctrine is reached when the individual, having rejected softness and embraced the tension of existence, discovers the majesty of their own voice in the sunset of their days. The fear of aging and dying is the fear of those who have never been in tune with themselves. Those who fear death are those who feel they have wasted their lives floating in comfort. Those who reach the end and realize their instrument never emitted a true note because they never had the courage to endure the pain of tension. But for the monarch, old age is the definitive concert hall of his life. By keeping his body demanded, his mind sharpened in the study of uncomfortable truths, and his spirit tensed in the absolute acceptance of reality, the monarch becomes an instrument of lethal precision. He no longer has to waste energy trying to get the world's attention. His frequency cuts the heavy air. When steel is perfectly tuned, the lightest touch is enough for the entire universe to hear its song. You will not need to raise your voice at the table to impose your will. You will not need to use emotional blackmail typical of scared elders. Your simple resonance will be enough to command the room. A single sustained cold gaze will be enough to stop disrespect in its tracks. A single word, pronounced from the belly, and loaded with the weight of unanesthetized experience, will have the strength to resolve a dispute of years. You speak from the resonance of a character tempered in time's furnaces. The modern world, infected by the virus of mediocrity, will look at your figure with envy and reverential fear. They will be unable to understand how a human who has crossed the same tragedies, instead of bowing and asking for mercy, stands with the rectitude of a pillar of creation. You are the causa primera. While they begged the heavens to take away the pain, you took the tuner's wrench and tightened the string one more turn. That is the mathematical difference between biomass rotting in complaint and the monarch ruling from the top. The monarch demands that his machinery performs at the maximum operative tension. Do not let cheap mercy turn you into a useless ornament. If your children try to overprotect you, preventing effort under the excuse of love, reject that offense. Love that weakens the beloved is poison. You must demand friction. You must walk against the wind and think until ignorance retreats from you. At the end, when the theater lights begin to dim and the curtain of life initiates its inevitable descent, the silence that remains will not be that of a broken machine. It will be the solemn, majestic, and absolute silence that follows the last chord of a grand piano. A final chord played at maximum tension. Its pure, perfect, and heart-wrenching frequency will remain suspended in the air, vibrating in the memory of generations for decades, proving that he who has the courage not to loosen his strings before suffering earns the unnegotiable right for his truth to resonate in eternity. The steel is finally tuned. Chapter 9. The Hidden Wavelength, Long-Term Vision. If you contemplate with the patience of a naturalist the behavior of contemporary society, you will discover that the entire world has been infected by an invisible parasite. It is not a virus that attacks the blood or the lungs. It is a plague that attacks the perception of time. Humanity has lost the ability to wait. A hysterical religion has been established that worships the instant, quick pleasure, the immediate response, and the urgent result. We shall call this disease of haste and spiritual myopia the poison of immediacy. In youth, this poison manifests in the desperation to accumulate triumphs prematurely and to achieve wealth without effort. But the most devastating tragedy occurs when this disease infects men and women who have entered the autumn of their lives. There is a hidden terror in old age, the suffocating feeling that the hourglass is emptying. Upon feeling the inescapable proximity of the end, many mature individuals panic. They believe they must hurry. They want their children to change today. They demand that their sacrifices be recognized at this precise moment. The elder who runs, who becomes impatient because the world does not surrender at the speed he desires, is an undignified spectacle. He has exchanged the majesty of wisdom for the tantrum of a capricious child. Society encourages this indignity. It offers us shortcuts for everything. It sells us the illusion that we can harvest without having plowed the land. We are taught to look only at what is in front of our noses, forgetting that true empires, both of stone and of the soul, are never built for the present. They defy eternity. The man and woman who aspire to absolute sovereignty must repudiate this pathetic haste with disgust. You must understand that desperation for immediate results is the signature of the slave, of the subordinate who needs his daily wage at the end of the day to eat. The monarch does not collect daily wages. He is beyond that. The monarch operates in a completely different stratum of time. He does not measure his life in minutes, nor in hours, nor in the ephemeral applause of the afternoon. He measures his existence through the majestic, slow, and unstoppable mechanics of long waves. He understands that true power takes time to propagate and settle. Propagation dynamics and the sound equation. To dismantle the blasphemy of immediacy and purge the fear of running out of time, we must abandon self-help books and dive into the incorruptible purity of physics. We must understand how energy travels through matter by observing the science of wave propagation. Nature operates through specific, immutable mathematical laws. In the physics of sound, there is a fundamental relationship that governs the behavior of every vibration. The speed at which a wave travels is described by the equation v d lambda psi. In this law, $v is the speed of propagation, but lambda is the wavelength, and f is the frequency, the number of vibrations per second. Since the speed of sound in air is constant, wavelength and frequency maintain an inversely proportional relationship. This means if you raise the frequency, a high-pitched sound, the wavelength becomes tiny. Conversely, if you lower the frequency, a deep, sub-bass sound, the wavelength becomes immense. This mathematics rules your vital energy. High-pitched sounds, high frequency, and short wavelength are loud, annoying, and call attention immediately. A hysterical scream scares everyone. However, because their wavelength is so short, their energy is weak against obstacles. A high-pitched sound bounces off a simple curtain. It is absorbed by a thin wooden door. Meters from its birth, the high frequency loses its energy and dies. It cannot travel far. The man trapped in immediacy operates in high frequencies. His actions are hysterical screams. He argues loudly to impose his reason. He demands quick results. His efforts die a few meters away. His influence bounces off the first obstacle. No one listens to him in the long term because his energy lacks the length to penetrate the world's hard matter. It is a shrill, short noise that vanishes. But nature reserves its greatest power for the opposite end of the spectrum, the low frequencies. They are the true force. Observe the song of the blue whale in the immense ocean. The whale emits a sub-bass sound, a tone so low that the human ear often cannot detect it. It is a slow, heavy frequency, and because its frequency is so low, its wavelength, and lambda, is colossal. This sound wave does not bounce off small obstacles. Water currents or schools of fish do not stop it. The song can travel without interruption for thousands of kilometers, crossing entire ocean basins. An earthquake does not warn with a high-pitched beep. It warns with a sub-bass roar, a long wave traveling through the mantle, pulverizing the foundations of buildings. True sovereignty of old age demands that you mute your behavior toward this same physics. It demands you turn off the high-pitched scream of desperation for today and begin to emit on the hidden wavelength of monarchs. Stop reacting to the morning to be offended in the afternoon. Stop measuring impact by reaction. When the monarch speaks, he does not care if the door of indifference seems closed today. He knows he is emitting a wavelength so long that it will pierce the wall of time. He knows his advice or example may not bear fruit this week, but it will travel in silence, germinating years later. That is the majesty of governing. Geological time and the planting of oak groves. Accepting the physics of low frequencies means subjecting your psychology to a brutal change of scale. The ordinary man measures time in hours. The wise man measures time in decades. We shall call this stoic capacity to alter the internal clock, the assimilation of geological time. It is the end of the ego's frantic hurry. The terror of death lurking in mature humanity comes from a vanity disguised as urgency. We believe we need to see the final result of all our works before closing our eyes forever. The Father wants to see his Son perfect today. The Founder wants to see the empire consolidated and free from all danger immediately. The individual fills with anguish, hurries his movements, and spoils the work by wanting to take it out of the oven too soon. The monarch renounces the vanity of the harvest. He understands that supreme power resides not in plucking the fruit, but in the beautiful and lethal arrogance of planting the seed. There is an old tradition among aristocrats and cathedral builders, the planting of oak groves. An oak is noble wood, immensely dense and hard, but an oak does not grow at the speed of grass. It takes 50, 100 or 200 years to reach the volume and hardness necessary to be useful for a war galleon. When a wise elder ordered a forest of oaks planted, he did so knowing with cold certainty that neither he nor his children would see those trees as a majestic forest. He planted something under whose shadow he was never going to sit. To the slave of immediacy, this is madness. Why invest in what I won't enjoy? For the monarch, it is the ultimate act of defiance against death. It is the practical application of the long wavelength. By planting the oak, the elder extends his domain beyond his biology. He dictates the laws of his empire for a century in which he will no longer be breathing. He has conquered the grave. This is the mental posture you must adopt today toward your environment. You have children or a circle of influence taking wrong decisions. Your animal instinct will ask you to shake them and scream high frequency, so they change before you pass away. The monarch represses that instinct with an iron fist. He understands that a man's character does not change by the force of a scolding. The monarch assumes geological time. He dedicates himself to planting oaks. How do you plant an oak in the soul of another? Through silent, implacable, and sustained example. Instead of complaining, you become the embodiment of honor. Instead of demanding respect with screams, you impose a dignity so icy and perfect that disrespect becomes a physical impossibility. You do not argue, you do not pursue. You only sow the seed of your own immutability. You must accept the possibility that you will not live to see the result of your example. Perhaps you close your eyes and your lineage remains a chaos. But the deep wave you emitted will not stop with your last heartbeat. The memory of your rectitude and your leaden dignity will remain sown in their minds. Decades after your departure, when they face true darkness, the seed will germinate. The wood of the oak you planted in silence will be the master beam that holds the roof of their houses. Working for a time you will not see is the only true antidote against the terror of death. It turns the disappearance of your physical body into an irrelevant logistical detail compared to the eternity of your will. The art of tactical slowness and the superiority of repose. The adoption of the long wavelength must manifest in your own body. Mind and matter are inseparably intertwined. You cannot have a long-term vision if you walk, speak, and breathe like someone in a hurry to reach the end of the hallway. The modern world demands speed, but speed is a trap for the weak organisms. The one who moves fast trips. The one who moves fast loses sight of the big picture. He sweats and confesses his own anxiety. The monarch executes what we call the art of tactical slowness. Observe the nature of the elite universe. Massive planets rotate and move through the vacuum of space with majestic slowness. Apex predators, like the old and experienced lion, do not run frantically. They walk with a slowness that instills terror, calculating every step. They only unleash their force in the exact millisecond of the lethal impact. You must appropriate this slowness. From this moment on, repudiate physical haste. When someone calls you, do not turn your head with nervous speed. Turn your neck slowly, with the weight of an invisible crown. When they demand a decision under pressure, let them wait. Breathe deeply and speak with a deliberately paused cadence. Walk with the grave gait of one who owns the territory. This slowness is not the clumsiness of physical decay. It is a declaration of sovereignty. By moving slowly in a desperate world, you send a devastating thermodynamic message. You tell them, your urgency is not mine. Your problems do not alter my frequency. I operate in a time zone you cannot comprehend. By adopting tactical slowness, you create a gravitational field. Time seems to stop in your presence. The young and anxious will be forced to slow their own motors. They will feel uncomfortable at first, but eventually the denser energy will subdue the lighter, and the environment will sink to your rhythm. The empire that does not need its own eyes. Maturity is not the sunset of influence. It is the transition from hand-to-hand combat to long-range ballistic warfare. The youth fights with fists to conquer today. The wise elder, the monarch of the frequency of truth, withdraws. He climbs the mountain and installs the heavy artillery of his character. He fires massive projectiles, his unnegotiable values and his silence, calculating a parabola so immense that the projectiles will hit the heart of future generations. Renouncing the gratification of immediate results is the greatest act of purification. It is the absolute cleansing of the ego. It is the truth. Speak the truth not for applause today, but because truth is the only frequency with the wavelength necessary not to disintegrate in the vacuum. Do not fear the passage of time or the end. The end is only terrifying for those who have sown nothing in the depth of the earth, who have lived screaming. You, who have decided to embrace the long sub-bass wave of the monarch, must not fear the silence of the grave. You know, with the cold smile of cathedral builders, that although your eyes close, your gravitational weight and the nobility of your silence will continue to orbit the world of the living. You will rule the destinies of your blood and hold the roof of your empire from the invincible and immortal darkness. The wave has been sent. It will never stop. Chapter 10. The Perfect Chord, the Fusion of Being. The schizophrenia of the soul and the agony of fragmentation, the noise of the world. If there exists a truly Dantean punishment in the human experience, a torture that requires neither physical chains nor external executioners, it is the punishment of inhabiting a fragmented soul. To reach the autumn of existence and discover that one has lived not one but 3 simultaneous lives is the origin of all bitterness. We shall call this tragedy of the will, this disease that tears at the chest of ordinary men and women from the inside out, the agony of fragmentation. Observe with pity and horror the behavior of the masses around you. The common individual lives in a state of permanent moral schizophrenia. In thoughts, he fervently desires peace. In the solitude of his intimate thoughts, his mind emits one frequency. However, when he opens his mouth before society, his family, or his adversaries, the fear of conflict or the need to be loved betrays him. His words do not reflect his thoughts. He says yes when his mind screamed no. His voice emits a second frequency. And finally, when the inescapable moment of physical action arrives, the ordinary individual cowers or lets himself be dragged by the inertia of habit. He does not do what he thought. He does not fulfill what he said. He ends up executing a mediocre, lukewarm act. His body emits a third frequency, thinking one thing, saying another. Think one thing, say another, and end up doing something completely different. This is the clinical diagnosis of human weakness. The modern world encourages this division. They convince us that this fragmentation is necessary to survive in society. They call it adaptability. But nature punishes this division with spiritual death. Imagine the biological and thermodynamic wear of sustaining this triple lie for 60 years. Maintaining 3 different people within one body generates monstrous internal friction. Thought pulls right, word pulls left, and action sinks into stagnation. The soul of the fragmented individual is subjected to perpetual tearing forces. This is why you see so many elders consumed by irritability and chronic anguish, despite having all material needs met. They suffer because the scaffolding of their lies has become too heavy for their tired bones. They spend all their vital energy remembering which lie they told to whom and silencing the voice of their conscience. The man and woman who aspire to absolute sovereignty at the summit of their days must repudiate this fragmentation with disgust. A kingdom divided against itself cannot prevail. To reclaim the title of monarch, You must execute the most painful and definitive act of metallurgy in nature, the absolute fusion of your own being. 2. Constructive interference and the acoustics of the perfect chord, the physics of resonance. To understand the magnitude of the power unleashed when an individual unifies their three dimensions, we must enter the mathematical purity of wave physics. We must observe the phenomenon that occurs when frequencies stop fighting each other and decide to ally. In acoustics, we have spoken of destructive interference. But an opposite phenomenon exists, a miracle of mechanical physics that possesses a capacity for terrifying destruction and creation. Constructive interference. Imagine a pond. If you throw two identical stones at the same time, the waves will travel. If the waves are perfectly synchronized, physics dictates that they do not clash. They add up. The amplitudes of both waves combine mathematically. If each wave was 1 meter high, by merging in perfect synchrony, a wall of water 2 meters high suddenly rises. Energy is not only conserved, but multiplied in its frontal impact. In music, this perfect alignment is called the perfect chord or absolute consonance. When a choir of voices or a set of instruments tuned with precision emit their notes in a pure mathematical relationship, the resulting sound ceases to be a sum of parts. A new entity is born, a colossal wall of sound that makes the wooden beams of the theater tremble. This is a mechanical law that can alter solid matter. Think of the opera singer breaking a fine crystal glass with her voice. The singer does not break the glass because she screams with deafening volume. Volume alone does not break the glass. She breaks the glass because she finds the natural resonance frequency of the crystal and emits a note that aligns exactly with it. She executes perfect constructive interference. By making her voice and the vibration of the glass coincide without a single fissure, the amplitude of the wave grows exponentially until the molecular structure of the glass can no longer withstand the tension and it shatters. This is the science of absolute power. When you have thought pointing in one direction but your word pointing in another, you are emitting out-of-phase frequencies. You are creating destructive interference. Your energy is annulled. This is why when you give an order to your family without being convinced of it, no one obeys you. Your voice lacks amplitude. The monarch assimilates the physics of constructive interference and executes the alignment of the three pillars. He decides that from this instant, his thought, his word, and his physical action will vibrate at exactly the same frequency, in the same phase, and in the same millisecond. No more divisions. What the monarch thinks in the darkness of his bedroom is exactly what he decrees with his leaden voice at the dining table. And what he decrees at the dining table is exactly what his hands execute at dawn, without hesitation and without apology. By merging these three forces into a perfect chord, the wave acquires amplitude. He does not need to shout. He does not need to get angry. Being completely aligned with himself, the energy of his will multiplies. The society and the family, built with the fragile lies of convenience, act like the crystal glass. When the monarch's perfect chord hits them, their disrespect cannot stand the tension. Third, the forging of the monolith and the cruelty of coherence, the monarch's tuning. Achieving this fusion of the three dimensions of being is not an act of peaceful meditation. It is a process of brutal metallurgy. You cannot fuse steel if you do not first subject it to extreme fire. To become the perfect chord, you must be willing to apply clinical cruelty to your own habits of complacency. The ordinary individual is made of loose parts tied with wire. It is a noisy and fragile mechanism, full of grinding gears. The monarch subjects himself to the fire until he melts into a monolith. A monolith is a block of stone carved from a single piece. It has no moving parts. It has no screws that can loosen. Having no separate parts, it has no internal friction. A monolith simply exists, weighing tons, immovable before the passing of centuries. Becoming a human monolith demands the final eradication of white lies, diplomatic omissions, and promises of good breeding. It demands you mutilate your need to be seen as docile. Observe your relationships. Someone of your blood asks for a favor that threatens your peace. Thought, your wise instinct, tells you the answer must be a blunt no. If you were the fragmented man, you would say, "Let me think about it," trying to soften the blow. And your action would end up being to yield halfway. The monarch, in his forging process, detects the divergence and annihilates it on the spot. In the same millisecond, the thought formulates the refusal, the mouth opens, and the word becomes the exact mold of that thought. The voice, grave and unadorned, says, "No, I will not do that." No pleading explanation is added. No medical excuse is invented. And then physical action seals the fusion. The monarch does not move from his chair, does not transfer the money, and maintains his face in a state of perfect ice. Thought, no. Word, no. Action, total immobility. The fusion is complete. The chord has sounded with radioactive purity. The social impact of this coherence is terrifying for the surrounding biomass. Ordinary people deeply fear coherent individuals because coherence is unpredictable for manipulators, but absolutely predictable for the laws of physics. No one knows how to manipulate a monolith because the monolith has no levers to pull. When you execute the cruelty of coherence, you will feel initial pain. It will be the pain of the umbilical cord being cut, the pain of others' expectations dying at your feet. Your relatives will accuse you of becoming cold and distant. They will tell you that old age has made you stubborn and selfish. You must receive those accusations as the medals of honor of your new sovereignty. Your hardness is not bitterness, it is density. Your coldness is not a lack of love, it is the absence of emotional friction. You have ceased to be a set of trembling parts and have fused into a single rock. There is no room for doubt. The physical relief experienced upon becoming a monolith is indescribable. Suddenly, your mind empties. You no longer have to waste energy remembering which mask to put on. The colossal effort you dedicated to keeping lies alive disappears overnight, leaving an ocean of pure energy. You just are who you are. The symphony of gravity and the architect's rest. The magnum opus of the universe is not the scandalous thunder that scares herds for a second. It is the silent gravity that holds the stars in their orbit for all eternity. As the monarch strengthens the fusion of his being, he experiences the entry into the most majestic, fearsome, and beautiful stage of life. He reaches the true and only rest. The world lies to us when it promises that the rest of old age is found in a rocking chair watching television. That is the rest of corpses that still breathe. The true rest of the soul does not come from physical inactivity. It comes from the absolute cessation of internal struggle. When your thought, your verb, and your action are one and the same steel sword, the war is over. There are no more enemies inside the walls. And since there are no internal enemies, the need to fight external enemies vanishes through pure obsolescence. He who rules his own acoustics does not need to battle. The monarch walks the world with the dense and unmovable peace of solar systems. His mere presence in a place alters the behavior of everyone present. When the monarch enters the room, dissonance falls silent. Gossip stops. Chronic complaints choke in the throats of cowards. Gravity subdues the atmosphere. People approach you seeking advice, not because you are nice, but because they feel you are anchored to the bedrock of reality. You become the final arbiter, the judge who needs no gavel, because your gaze alone dictates what is fair. Respect begins to orbit around you, dictated by the laws of moral astrophysics. This is the peak of the frequency of truth. Pain, betrayal, the relentless passage of time, and the proximity of death, all those things that terrify fragile humanity, crash against the monolith without making a scratch. The monarch knows his physical body will decline, but he feels no fear of the darkness. The man who has aligned his three pillars does not die moaning. He says goodbye to the world with the serenity of a king who has left his house in perfect order. He knows that the frequency he emitted, that perfect chord of rectitude, silence and lead, cannot be destroyed by the grave. His wave will travel. Laws of energy conservation guarantee that the wave of his character will continue traveling through the blood of his descendants, dictating the course of his family long after the instrument has stopped playing. You did not come to this world to be a blurry echo of others' opinions. You came to forge steel. You did not endure the winters of life to end your days paying homage to the demands of fools. You came to forge an instrument of steel, to tighten the strings in the fire of pain, to purge the acoustics of your ancestors, and to emit the purest, heaviest, and most perfect note of the entire firmament. Stand up, sit on the throne of your years, breathe deeply, and let your truth fall upon the world like a block of black granite. The time has come to sound. The symphony is ready. The monarch is here. The truth is you. Conclusion: the tuning fork strike. The din of battle has ceased. Through the pages of this treatise, you have traveled the inverse path to the one modern society, in its infinite hysteria, had traced for you. For decades, the world demanded that you be light. They taught you to run after the herd's approval, to drown in the static of complacency, and to fear solitude. They demanded you fill the void with weightless words. They required you to be balsa wood, drifting so as not to disturb the waves of others' emotions. But you have decided to descend to the forge. You have understood that true authority in the autumn of life is not begged for, nor negotiated, nor imposed with high-pitched screams. Sovereignty is forged in the density of lead, tensed in the steel of voluntary suffering, and consolidated in the absolute immobility of the rock. You have dismantled the schizophrenia of youth and assimilated that supreme peace is not found by fleeing friction, but by becoming a monolith so massive that no storm can alter its gravity. The mechanics of the final impact. We arrive now at the culminating act of your material existence. At the moment when the instrument, perfectly tuned, purged of the echo of its ancestors, and freed from the need to please, must fulfill its purpose in nature. In the science of acoustics, the tuning fork was not created to adorn a glass display case. It was not designed to debate with the other instruments in the orchestra about which note is correct, nor to beg them to lower their volume. The solid steel tuning fork was created for one thing only: to receive the strike. This tuning fork strike is the physical and definitive metaphor for your maturity. You no longer need long conversations to establish your limits. You no longer need to justify your absences, nor explain your philosophy, nor ask for forgiveness for protecting your peace. You simply execute the strike. A pure act, a grave decree, a gaze sustained in the void. It is the end of all external explanations. By emitting that single note, clean, thundering, and charged with the weight of a lifetime of experience, you force the molecules of the room to reorganize. The destructive interference of the outside world, blackmail, haste, disrespect, crashes against your fundamental frequency and disintegrates. You impose cosmic order. The reverberation in eternity. There is no greater privilege, nor greater responsibility in old age than becoming the reference note for your own lineage. When the storm sweeps away the certainties of younger generations, when panic and immediacy leave them breathless and without a compass, they will not seek refuge in those who shout just like them. They will seek refuge in the heaviest entity in the room. They will seek the unbribable echo of your tuning fork. The fear of the end of days is a thermal illusion, a terror reserved for those who lived out of tune. The biological body, like the wooden case of an old cello, will inevitably wear out. It is the law. Your hands will lose strength, and matter will return to the earth that reclaimed it. But the unshakable physics of energy conservation assures us that the frequency you emitted cannot be destroyed. The absolute silence with which you faced tragedy and the perfect chord of your coherence will continue to travel. Those long sub-bass waves will continue to bounce in the blood of your descendants, holding up the beams of their houses long after you have closed your eyes. You have ceased to be a slave to noise to become the architect of silence. Anchor your center of mass. You no longer orbit anyone, you are gravity itself.